So what we want to do is talk through a little bit of the work that we've completed so far in each of these three areas of principles, policies, and practices, illustrating how we're doing the work, showing where we are today, and then urging you to join with us as we continue in this dialogue. So let's start with principles. When we first got going on this, I think some people came with the question of principles or editorial integrity as though it's like some rule book, you know, no you can't, and yes you can. And that's really not been the character of the conversation we've had. We started by actually going back and looking across our history in the field as to when, in prior occasions, our colleagues have set out principles for public broadcasting. We were somewhat shocked and surprised to find that on a national and collective basis, we had to reach back 25 years to find such an exercise. To 1984, when a group of our colleagues convened at a conference center called Windspread, and in several conversations and meetings crafted a set of editorial integrity principles at that time, driven in particular by the need to address concerns that were surfacing among those of us who are state licensees or affiliated with the state government, and the questions of government entities and editorial independence. So these are the statements that they emerged with in that exercise. They're good, they're important, but as we review them, they also feel of a time that was a then of today. A few of us, I think, if we were writing on a blank slate, would say it exactly this way. But it gave us an encouraging start to say people have done this before, they've stepped up to this question, worked hard at it together, and at the end come with something that, in this occasion, 25 years ago, wound up being broadly embraced, and in fact, actually literally adopted by many of the national and local organizations in public broadcasting at the time. So how's our group been doing on this? The way we came at it was to frame this as guideposts in a time of change, and the working group that we set to this task focused on four areas that I'll review here quickly. One is we need a pretty good statement for today's reality of what our objectives are as public media. What is it we're trying to do? This is the current state of play on that the objective of public media is to increase public education, enrich cultural knowledge, and support civic participation. And believe me, every word in that phrase had a little bit of arm wrestling around it for the group to come to consensus on it. But also underneath that are some other important statements about who and what we are that are almost as important. That the character of what we do is community-based and reflects the communities where people live, raise their kids, have their jobs, retire, and enjoy their lives. It's important that what we do be inclusive and reflective of those communities, a challenge that many of us have to confront in new and different ways. That our work is focused on the common good, not partisan, not selective, not over here but not over there, but on what we share in our communities. And a truly differentiating fact about public media in today's environment is that we remain accessible to all, free or fundamentally free to all to come to what we have to offer. Second area that this group focused on is the means by which we do this. And this was an interesting exercise to go through as they tallied up the different ways in which public media provides its service to the public, all of which we, in a sense, want to own. Of course, there's the creation of the original content that many of us do every day. There's the curation, acquiring, and aggregation of content from so many other places that we pull together and present to our communities. There's the collaboration, both as professional colleagues within our field and collaboration with other organizations and individuals in our communities. Increasingly, we hear stations talk about their convening function, both virtual and in real life spaces like this one, bringing people together to talk, to argue, to wrestle around ideas, or just celebrate the life of community, and hopefully in that convening to find solutions, both in their personal lives and to the issues that confront where they live. More and more of us are building a communications capacity in the community itself, helping our citizens attain a digital literacy, helping them own and control means of production of content that they can create, that speaks with their voices, that they can then share with others. And lastly, of course, kind of where we join the game in being public broadcasters, we distribute. We distribute all of this stuff, and more we're doing it every place we can find a channel or a place on which to do it. Third area that the group focused in terms of defining who and what we are that ought to guide us going forward is the work that we do to ensure the integrity of our work that engenders that trust in the community. And here they singled out three important things. One is that we need clear professional practices in a time of change. Not that there's ever going to be absolute and final answers to this, but we need to roll up our sleeves, do the hard work, both collectively and in our own organizations, to say, this is how we do it. This is what we stand for. There are right ways to do things, and there's wrong ways, and we understand the differences between them. Second, there's that transparency thing again. And increasingly, we need to be open to all about where our funding comes from and how we got it, about the content that we create and how we made it. So that others can look and judge for themselves if we're doing the job right or wrong. If they've got an opinion to share about it, bring it on. And third, that we have a multiple level of accountability that we have for all of our organizations. It includes the accountability we have as FCC licensees with our transmitters. It includes the accountability that we have at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting as the stewards of the federal funding. It's the accountability we have with our own governance structures, their glorious diversity. But all of us are accountable to somebody, which is why we are owned and controlled in our communities. Ultimately, we're accountable to the users, who we ask to give us their time and share with us, and so many of them who respond with their individual contributions of support. The fourth and final area that our principals group singled out is the relationships that are so fundamental to what we do. And in particular, the relationships with some core constituencies that are so much the fabric of what we are and of our success. The users, our content partners, our funders, governing boards, the other media with which we work, and the legislators and regulators that frame the context of what we do. Now, these are works in progress. That will be everything else that Ted and I are going to share. We're starting to put these things up on our website. These principles have been up in draft form a couple of times now. The newest version will be up very shortly. We'll put up the address for the website at the end of this presentation. And we would really encourage everybody in this room to go there, check it out, read the context these emerged from, add your comments and suggestions to them.
So as we were working through, obviously, the guiding principles, we were also identifying issues that were of particular concern to stations. And we did a number of surveying, both conversations and working through AGC and others. And we identified a long list, and then we prioritized them. And you see some of them listed here. The ones that reached the top for the initial work were funding agendas and firewalls and editorial partnerships. I'm going to focus initially on the fundings, agendas, and firewalls. And I'm going to read some of the material that came out of this group because, as with the guidepost group, they are very specific about how they do the wording. And I want to be a little careful I don't get too freewheeling with it. In the area of general news, our task force recommends that public media exercise careful consideration when deciding who can underwrite its news programming. In particular, stations should carefully assess potential underwriters whose agenda is designed to bring about a specific political outcome or to influence public policy on controversial matters. The following questions may be helpful when considering such underwriting. Is the underwriting organization's primary mission to influence governmental decision-making about issues that are in the subject of the station's ongoing news coverage? Does the underwriting organization take positions on controversial public policy issues that are the subject of the station's current news coverage? Does the underwriting organization's lobby activities focus on issues that are the subject of the station's current news coverage? While different stations might answer these questions differently, it is crucial that each station adopt a policy that guides its decision-making process and that it is fully transparent about the policies and choices it makes with staff, the funding community, and the audience. In news specials, in general, individual news specials should not be funded by organizations that have a vested interest in the specific content covered in the program. This includes funding from nonprofit, for-profit, and governmental institutions. Again, some following questions that may be used to determine what constitutes a vested interest. Would a reasonable person conclude that a funder has a stake in the content of a program? Consider the following examples. An energy company funding a news program on clean power alternatives. A hospital or clinic funding a news program on healthcare costs. A mortgage bank funding a news program on housing costs. If a consumer would reasonably wonder whether a funder might influence the direction of a news special, then stations will normally be well served to reject such funding. It's easy to say it here. I think, as we all know, when you get into the reality, there are many areas of gray. We're going to cite a few case studies. One is Wisconsin Public Television and Radio, which has produced a long-running series of candidate debates and public policy specials that is funded in part by the state teachers union on this side, and on the other side, the state's leading business lobby. Independently, each entity meets our definition of a vested interest. But due to the offsetting nature of each organization's policy agenda, serve to nullify any perceptual problems. Open question. Maybe think it through. Wisconsin has come to the conclusion, after going through a series of questions, that this works in their community and works for their policies and practices. The funding of history and information programming occupies a little more complex middle ground and deserves careful consideration. In what ways, for example, are news and history programs different? Both often deal with complex and controversial matters of public importance, and as such, both must adhere to strict standards of accuracy and fairness. So can a history program be funded by an entity which has a vested interest in its outcome? We showed an earlier example with Nebraska Educational Television. Again, they went through a particular process, determined that that worked for them. Another entity might go through a similar process and come to a different conclusion. In San Francisco, for example, a nonprofit organization with close ties to a well-known vintner offered to provide funding for a KQED film focusing on the history of winemaking, including the role of that vintner. After consideration, KQED declined. An example of informational program funding comes from Twin Cities Public Television, which produced a local follow-up program to a frontline film on Parkinson's disease. TPT approached the Mayo Clinic about both funding the program and working collaboratively on it. The Mayo Clinic agreed, and the resulting program featured interviews with patients, families, and a physician from the Mayo Clinic. The program presented factual information about Parkinson's and did not feature specific services of the Mayo Clinic. The station was also transparent about the nature of the funding and editorial partnership and acknowledged the co-production relationship on air. So some questions to consider. Is it appropriate for a funder to also be an editorial partner? If so, are there particular kinds of programs which such funding is appropriate and others where it is not? Is the funding organization which would share editorial direction in the project generally well respected? Were any strings attached to the funding of the program, such as a requirement that a representative of the funding organization be included in the program? Would the station have produced the program with the same editorial approach if funding had come from a different source?